Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that introduction that I didn't fully understand, but I'm sure it was glowing. Today, I want to talk to you about an area of research that I'm really passionate about. As a developmental scientist, I'm particularly fascinated in the early development of children. And through my research, we've been exploring the nature-nurture debate that's been going on for a very long time. So through this talk, I want to talk to you, give you a kind of brief overview of baby brain development. Then I want to tell you a little bit about the methodologies that we use as a developmental psychologists and scientists to try and understand what do babies think. And then I want to explore some of the data that we have around the really sophisticated skills that our infants are showing in the very early years, within the first year of life. And then finally, I want to finish off by wrapping this up to give a really positive note towards parents, because sometimes parents get a message that they're not doing enough. And actually, if we work in collaboration with our children, the message is that we're doing everything particularly right. So first thing is, I want to put your hand up if you have a child. Okay, so I'm speaking to you guys specifically, and I want you to put your hand up if you are a child. Okay, this is you're basically going to tell your parents that you are really, really amazing, okay, and have been amazing since the very, very beginning. So the take-home messages from this talk I want you to take home are the baby's brain is amazing, and so are you as parents, as adults who are around children all the time. This image shows us what's going on in the infant, the fetal brain before birth. And I think this image shows us really, really interesting changes in the neonatal brain. Your brain, as adults, has lots of cortical folding. You can see lots of folds on the brain here. And basically that means that we can pack lots of neurons into a very small space. The neonatal brain begins very, very smooth and transforms over a very brief period of time, 25 weeks to 40 weeks. Folding is an explosive process within the womb. This is really important for some of our research where we look at the premature brain, babies who are born early. And we can see that all of this cortical folding is happening in a really different environment in the neonatal unit. And this may explain why we see some quite measurable differences in children who are born very preterm compared to children who are born at term. Now, within that amazing brain, we have about 1 billion neurons. And these neurons are simply passages for electrical currents to flow through the brain. The really important component of the neuron is this myelin sheath. It wraps around the neuron and makes it a very efficient way of processing electrical currents. The important bit here in this slide are the synapses. And the synapses are where the information, the electrical current, jumps from neuron to neuron. And what we can see when we look at the changes in the neurons within the brain over the first 2 years of life is there's a huge blooming process of the number of synapses within the human brain. Actually, at 2 years old, children have at 3 years old, children have approximately 2 times the number of synaptic connections as do adults. So this huge blooming process goes on in the very first 2 years of life. And then what we see is a pruning process after that. We call it what fires together, wires together. So as we see this firing together, we see these pruning processes happening, and the brain becomes more and more efficient with development. But you can see the amazing explosion of synaptic connections in the first 2 years of life, and this is why we usually talk about the incredible importance of the early years in terms of child development. It's also really important to put this in the context of what I've said already, nature versus nurture, or genes versus environment. And as developmental psychologists, we've been able to get more and more information that suggests to us that genes provide a blueprint for brain development, but the environment provides the construction process of the brain. So we can't say that one is more important than the other. These two have to go hand in hand. And what's also really important, and I'm going to show you some images that represent this later on, is that Sometimes parents believe that they are driving the environment of their child's development, but what we also see is the infant themselves is driving their environment from some innate interests that they are born with. So it's a reciprocal relationship between parent and child driving their environment to help construct their own brain. So how do we work out what children think? Now, if we were in the 1600s, we would have been talking to this chap, a philosopher, John Locke. John Locke said, babies are tabula rasas. They're born with nothing going on in their heads, okay? Now, we have changed quite a lot in terms of our understanding of what's going on in the infant mind, and we basically have been able to find out that John Locke was entirely incorrect. The thing I get asked all the time as a developmental psychologist is, I just wish I knew what was going on inside her head. And this is my daughter, Farah, at about 3 months old. The really interesting thing as a developmental psychologist was there were a number of times when I asked that question too. So as a psychologist, we still struggle to understand what's going on in the infant brain. But we can use really lovely, sophisticated methods to understand infant thinking. Generally, we use tasks that we describe as habituation, making babies really, really bored, okay? So in this image, this child has been presented with a face of a human, and they'll be hearing that face say the same sound over and over and over again. Ba, 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 until they become bored and look away, okay? Then the face says something different, na. If the infant is able to discriminate between those two sounds, ba, na, they will re-engage with the task and look at the image again. They have dishabituated. They've become interested. And to be able to do that task, they have to show some conceptual understanding of the information that is going on around them. So using habituation tasks, we can try and understand the infant brain. This is really difficult. Any parent in the room will know that trying to get an infant to focus on anything is very complex. You bring them into a lab that they don't know. They may be sleepy, they may be angry, they may be hungry. And so doing these tasks takes a very long time. We can use other different types of tasks, such as choice preferences, so giving a child a choice between two objects to see which object they choose. That can give us some understanding of what they may be thinking. We can use eye tracking. So in this image here, this infant is sitting on their mother's lap. This is a computer screen, and underneath the computer screen is a remote eye tracking device. That remote eye tracking device tracks the eye movements of the infant and can tell us what that infant is paying attention to. This can give us vital information into what the infant may be processing at the same time. Finally, we can use neuroscientific approaches, such as EEG. Here, this kid looks really happy. I can tell you now that most kids with an EEG cap on their head are not very happy. And what we do is we put these little electrodes on their head. It's non-invasive, it just sits on their scalp. The only thing is we need to put a little bit of fluid between the little pads on the EEG to make contact with the scalp. And then we can measure brain electrical waves whilst children are doing certain types of tasks. Now, sometimes this setup takes about 20 minutes. So sometimes you might have done this process and your baby's fallen asleep. And if you're interested in baby brains when they're dreaming, this is very interesting. But if you're interested in baby brains when they're doing certain different types of tasks, this is very frustrating. So when we see those news reports about brain scientists finding out very interesting things about infants' brain processing, think about all the effort they've had to go in to get that data. So now I'm going to give you some examples of what we know about what infants think about. Now, some of this data is actually quite old, but has been replicated numerous times. And just because something's old doesn't mean it's not good. So I'm going to show you some beautiful examples of some of the research that has gone on with infants. So this seminal work was undertaken by a guy called Andy Meltzoff. And in this research, what he did was he wanted to see whether infants had an innate sense of imitation. And he took 12 to 21-day-old infants, and he put the baby in front of his face and made facial expressions to see if they would imitate his facial expressions. And you can see here some really beautiful images of this infant directly replicating the facial expressions. Why is this important? Well, we actually think from further research that this imitation process, this beautiful back and forth communication between adult and child, is the absolute foundations of communication. You know, when you approach someone and you smile, hopefully they will smile back to you. And that is a kind of door-opening process into human communication. If you approach someone and they don't smile back to you, you may step backwards, you may not engage in a conversation with them. Imitation is fundamental for human communication, and Andy Meltzoff's work suggests that this begins really at birth, 12 days old. And what this tells us is that we imitate things that we are interested in. Why is imitation important here? In the infant, imitation enables parent and child to develop that very beautiful early attachment behaviours that leads to more sophisticated communication throughout development. Now, this is an example of I'm just making eye contact to the person in here to make sure the videos work, of an infant and their father. If we could just play that again one more time. They're doing a little dance. That's not meant to happen. So, what we see here in this video is the infant looking at the father's arm and looking at the person taking the video. The person taking the video is me. And I'm saying, this will be really good for my lectures. This is an amazing slide. But I didn't get it perfectly. Can you do it again? Can you do it again? And if we move on to the next video, this is an amazing example of one-trial learning. In the first slide, my daughter, watches my husband's arm rise towards an object that he's interested in. She looks at the point from which the movement comes from and follows the point to look at the object. When I ask for my husband to do it again, this time she does it quite spontaneously and quickly, and then all of a sudden she moves her finger to something else. Because she's interested in what her father is interested in, they've entered into a communicative process, and then she has driven the environment. She has driven his attention to something different. This is a really lovely example of joint attention. And so therefore we can see the developmental origins of joint attention in the work of Andy Meltzoff from this imitative process that then becomes something incredibly, very sophisticated, very quickly. This video was taken when she was 12 months old, of being able to draw her father's attention to something else. And this is the beginning of being able to teach word learning. So there, her father had the opportunity to say, polar bear, and then fox. And she's starting to be able to learn the words around her. So going from this basic imitation process at 12 days old, we can see how this interaction between parent and child develops to something that's really essential for future development. We also know from the infant research that we are born with skills that we can really build on. And this is my particular area of research, which is around early number skills. This research has been done with lots of children, but we're going to focus on a study with 5 to 6 month old children. Now, in this task, we're doing an habituation task. We're trying to make babies bored. And we show them 2 dots, and then we move the dots around the screen. They're still kind of interested. They're thinking this is kind of interesting still. We move the dots again. They're getting a tiny bit bored. They are really bored here. They're looking away. We've made them officially bored. They are habituated to the stimuli. And then we show them this. And this is the response that we get from the baby. Wow, this is super interesting. We've gone from 2 to 3. Now think about this. This means these children become interested again. Their looking time has gone to half the time before they started. So they've decreased their looking time, and suddenly when we change the stimuli, their looking time becomes much longer. They're really interested. This tells us they know the difference between the quantity 2 and the quantity 3 at 5 to 6 months old. I think that's exceptional. Now, this is where it gets amazing, okay? In this task, we show, again, 5 to 6 months old, a little screen, okay? And we put a little Mickey Mouse toy on the stage. We pull up the screen, and we then put another little toy in behind the screen. We make this very obvious to make sure the children see there are 2 objects behind the screen. And you make sure you bring your hand out and make sure the infants know there's 2 objects behind the screen. We have left them there. Now, there are 2 different outcomes to this study. One is the screen drops down and 2 objects are there. Or the screen drops down and 1 object is there. Now, as big adults and big kids, we know that the correct answer is 2, okay? What about the babies? Do they show us anything interesting when we do this task with the babies? Absolutely. So when we show the answer 1, babies show lots of looking time. They are absolutely intrigued when the answer is incorrect. And when the answer is 2, they're like, yeah, totally knew that. That's absolutely what I expected. I'm not going to pay any attention. So when the answer is incorrect, when the answer doesn't go with their expectations, children show those surprised looking times. So there's a suggestion that not only can babies know the difference between quantities of 2 and 3 and 1 and 3, small quantities, they can also have this innate ability of understanding what the outcome of basic addition and basic subtraction is. Now, why would this be even important? Well, we think as developmental scientists, these skills that they have as babies, we use to build our culturally relevant information upon. So that skill, being able to discriminate between 2 and 3 dots, means that we have this system that we can tie the number words 2 and 3 to give the number word meaning. So it's a really important innate skill that we can build upon through development. What's even more exceptional is this work by Véronique Izard in Paris. This work shows that not only can children do these types of tasks in the visual field, they can also do these types of tasks in the auditory field and map between vision and sound. So in this task, babies are listened to a set of sounds, maybe 4 sounds, so 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, or 8 sounds, and they're also shown as a picture with 4 images on it or with 12 images on it. And what you find is when the visual stimuli and the auditory stimuli match, children aren't very interested. They're kind of bored by it. They know what they expect. But when they don't match, infants are particularly interested. They know that there's something going on. There's a mismatch between the auditory and the visual stimuli. So they're showing amazing, sophisticated processing between audio and visual streams these children are 10 to 11 months old. Finally, the other example that I want to kind of look at is that we also know that infants learn from the unexpected, things that we wouldn't predict, as we've seen already from the work in the number field. And in this study, I think is particularly fascinating with 11-month-old babies. So in this task, you can see that there's an arm. It's maybe not coming through particularly well in the slides, but you can see that there's a little stage. And the person is dropping a ball along the stage. Now, there's a block here behind a screen. And if you roll the ball towards a block, the ball should stop. But what the experimenters show the children when they go to drop the screen is that the ball has gone through the block. It's done something that is physically impossible. Then we give children a choice preference between a toy that has gone through the block, that's done something completely impossible, or a toy that has been stopped by the block, that has done something that is just possible. And what we see is children more often pick up the object that has done something that's physically impossible. They're interested in the object that is magical. And they do crazy things with these objects, such as bashing them off the table, throwing them on the ground, testing out the properties of these objects because they've done something that is completely unexpected. So children are learning things from these unexpected scenarios. And that's why things like peekaboo really work with babies. Because when you hide behind your hands effectively to a baby, you've disappeared. And when you reappear, the excitement that you see in an infant, which is completely seen across the globe in many cross-cultural studies, you're doing something that's completely unexpected to that baby. And that baby is learning so much about the communicative process and about how objects work through games such as peekaboo. So I just want to finish off by giving a note on parenting. These skills that our babies are born with are really important. And that has led us to focus on the first 1,000 days. So in the UK, we have lots of government investment around the first 1,000 days of development, and that's really, really essential. But this has also led to a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, being a mother of a young child as well, which is called intensive mothering. And the intensive mothering movement believes that the more input that we put into our babies' brains, the more higher achieving children we will get. We think that this process will increase child intelligence and increasing outcomes. And in this intensive mothering kind of process, parents are regarded as engineers of their child's future. But this, unfortunately, has led to quite dramatic and difficult differences in terms of maternal mental health and stress and pressure put on parents. And we've already seen that our babies are being born with these innate systems which enable their learning. And we know that the environment is really important for the construction of their brain. But also, you will see, anyone who's interacted with an infant, there are times when a child turns their head away and needs some time by themselves to be able to incorporate the information they've had, to encode the information they've had, and to build their brain themselves. So I want to finish with a plug for an amazing book by Alison Gopnik on parenting. And she takes a really lovely description of what parenting could and could not be. She describes either parents as engineers or carpenters, trying to force child development through our children and by this intensive mothering or intensive parenting process, or taking the approach of parents as gardeners and thinking about parents providing opportunities for construction of the child's brain and working in collaboration with our children through their development. So I think that this is probably the most data-driven, supported parenting process, this gardening process of child development. So I just want to finish with the 2 take-home messages that I started with. Your baby's brain is absolutely amazing, and we are too, as parents and as adults who work with children all the time. But also, coming back to the final point around parenting, that the brain is amazingly plastic. So the kids in the room, your brain will continue developing right up until you're about 21 to 24 years old. The frontal lobe of the brain is the last bit to kind of have been solidly developed. Your brain is developing the whole way through into your mid-20s. Adults in the room, do not despair. Your brain is still really plastic. There's still lots of changes going on in it. We just have to look at people who have maybe had a stroke and other areas of their brain that aren't damaged, compensate for it. So our brains are developing and changing the whole way through our lifespan. Our focus has been on the first 1,000 days and our infants, but also it's important to think about that we are doing these developmental processes in tandem between parent and child. So, thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the festival.